You came back. Good. Pull up a chair and try not to make a sound. This is the last whisper. There's a building on the edge of this city that nobody talks about anymore. Not the police, not the city council, not even the people who used to live nearby. They just stopped mentioning it. The lights on the top floor never go out. Every single night, at exactly midnight, something happens inside that building that the rest of the world has decided it's safer not to know about. One man decided he needed to know. He went in. And what he found up there, what was waiting for him at the top, changed everything he thought he understood about monsters, about love, and about what a person is willing to sacrifice to get both. This is the story of the Blood Tower, and I promise you, by the time this is over, you're going to think twice about any building that has lights on floors where nobody's supposed to be living. Picture a tower block in the middle of a dying neighborhood, the kind of place where the streetlights gave up years ago, where the council stopped sending workers because the workers stopped coming back. Every building around it is rotting, boarded windows, crumbling walls, garbage piled high enough to block the doorways. The whole area feels wrong, like something invisible pressed down on it and never let go. And right in the center of all that decay stood the tower. 12 floors, most of the windows dark and sealed, but at the very top, every single night without exception, a deep red light glowed from the penthouse, steady, unblinking, like something alive up there was watching the street below. The locals had a name for it, the Blood Tower. Nobody said it loudly, nobody said it twice. A man named Tyler had been searching for that building for 3 years. He wasn't a hunter by profession. He wasn't trained for anything like this. What he was desperate, the kind of desperate that replaces fear with something colder and more dangerous. Because 3 years earlier, the woman he was going to marry had walked past that neighborhood and never come home. Valerie, his fiancée, gone without a trace, without a body, without even a proper explanation from the police, who closed the case faster than anyone should have been comfortable with. Tyler had spent everything, his savings, his apartment, most of his sanity, trying to find out what happened to her. And the trail kept leading him back to the same address, the same tower, the same red light at the top. He made contact with a woman named Zara through channels he'd rather not explain. She was a resident, one of the few still living inside the building voluntarily, or at least voluntarily in the sense that she hadn't broken yet. She confirmed what Tyler already suspected. The tower was controlled by something that had no business existing in the 21st century. A vampire, ancient, calculating, and completely in command of every person still breathing inside those walls. His name was Max, and according to Zara, Max had turned the tower into a feeding operation, keeping residents alive just long enough to be useful, cycling through them like a farmer tends livestock. The ones he didn't drain completely became shells of themselves, traumatized beyond recovery, still breathing, still walking the corridors at midnight when the summons came, but hollowed out in ways that don't show up on any medical chart. Zara had a plan. She'd found Tyler because she needed someone from the outside, someone Max didn't already own. The deal was simple on paper. Tyler would pose as a hired killer, come in under cover of darkness, and use the one window of vulnerability that Max had, midnight, the feeding ritual. That was the only time the vampire left his reinforced safe room. That was when he could be reached. Tyler accepted the job. He told Zara it was professional. She believed him. He let her. What he didn't tell her was that this had never been about money. He entered the building just before 11 at night. Zara met him at the ground floor, a steel door built like something meant to survive a siege. The lobby behind it was immaculate. Fresh tiles, painted walls, warm lighting, the kind of entrance that made you feel safe for exactly 1 second before your brain caught up with the reality. Everything else in the neighborhood was rotting. This lobby was pristine, which meant someone wanted it that way. Someone wanted people to walk in without turning back. Zara called it the spider's web. She wasn't wrong. They couldn't use the elevator. It was under Max's control, only activated at midnight to bring the residents upstairs. So they took the stairs, and the stairs were where the mask slipped entirely. The smell hit first, something between mold and copper, something organic and wrong. And on the carpet, barely visible in the darkness, was a trail of old dried blood running from the ground floor all the way up toward the penthouse. Unbroken, like a path someone had drawn to make sure you knew exactly where you were headed. The second floor was the first crossing point. Zara guided Tyler through a pitch-black corridor with a flashlight, and that's where they encountered Mildred. She'd been in the building since the beginning, since before Max fully consolidated his control. She remembered what the place had been before, and what years of psychological manipulation, blood tribute, and supernatural dominance had done to her was visible in every square inch of her face. She stood in the middle of the corridor in a filthy dressing gown, pupils blown wide, hair matted, skin like paper. She looked at Tyler with eyes that had stopped processing the world the way human eyes are supposed to. And then she laughed. A sound that had no humor in it whatsoever, just volume and wrongness, and the echo of something that used to be a person. Zara tried to calm her down. Mildred ran. Zara didn't chase her. She just stood there for a moment with an expression that was equal parts grief and fury. Then she said, quietly, more to herself than to Tyler, that Mildred had been one of the first ones Max got to, and that whatever she was now was the direct result of years of systematic predation on a human being who never had a chance to fight back. They kept climbing. The fourth floor was different. That's where Professor Jim Hannigan lived, a former academic who'd come to the tower years ago to research what he'd assumed was a case of mass hysteria and collective psychological breakdown in an isolated community. He discovered very quickly that it wasn't that. He never left. Partly because of whatever supernatural bond Max maintained over his captives, partly, Hannigan admitted, because the community itself, broken and traumatized as it was, had become something he couldn't abandon. In Hannigan's flat, Tyler also met Maria and her son Billy. Maria was barely present, sitting on the sofa with the lights on behind her eyes but nobody home. Billy was 11 or 12, underfed, watching a football match on a television with no sound. He'd grown up inside the tower. That was the most disturbing detail of the entire floor. A child who had never known anything outside of this. Hannigan briefed Tyler with the seriousness of someone who had spent years studying an enemy and arrived at conclusions he wished he hadn't. He confirmed that the silver rounds Tyler was carrying were effective, not lethal on their own, but enough to weaken Max significantly. The wooden stake was the killing blow. The sequence mattered, the timing mattered, and midnight was the only window. He also said very clearly that the plan was a long shot. He said it without flinching, like a man who had already made his peace with the probability of failure and decided to try anyway. The eighth floor belonged to the Joneses, Henry and Cecilia, an elderly couple who had somehow constructed an entirely ordinary retirement life inside a building that hosted a centuries-old predator. Their flat was spotless. There were family photographs on every wall. There was a welcome mat at the door. Cecilia offered tea and sandwiches with the warmth of someone who had genuinely no interest in acknowledging what happened every night at midnight, what she herself did every night at midnight when the summons came. Henry made it explicit. They didn't get involved. Tonight was just like any other night as far as they were concerned. Zara accepted this without pushing back. Later in the corridor, she explained it to Tyler. The Joneses had built a psychological wall around themselves so thick that they functioned normally within it. They gave Max what he wanted. They told themselves it wasn't happening, and they had done this for so long that the wall had become structural. It was holding them up now. Take it away, and there was nothing underneath. The penultimate floor was where it nearly fell apart completely. This floor belonged to the Lee brothers, Danny and Tommy, Max's enforcers, the men who had made a deal early on, cooperation in exchange for comfort, decent food, working lights, and protection from the nightly ritual that the residents below endured. They were, in every meaningful sense, collaborators, and they were good at it. Danny caught them in the corridor, drunk, but not drunk enough to miss two people who had no business being on his floor at that hour. He went straight for Zara's throat. Tyler pulled him off. Danny screamed for his brother and went for the door. Tyler made a decision in about half a second and acted on it before he could second-guess himself. He used the dagger. Danny didn't get back up. Tommy came out of the flat a moment later with a sawn-off shotgun and grief that turned to rage in the time it takes to draw breath. He fired twice. Tyler and Zara were already running. They made the stairwell with shotgun pellets in the doorframe behind them. And then the alarm went off. Not a fire alarm in any conventional sense. This was the midnight signal, the summons. The residents throughout the building would now make their way up to the penthouse to fulfill their nightly obligation. The elevator started moving. The window Tyler had been working toward for 3 years was open, and it was closing. They ran. The top floor corridor was well lit compared to everything below it. The carpet was newer, the walls were clean, and the trail of blood, which had followed them from the ground floor, ended at a heavy steel door at the far end of the hall. The door was already open. What was inside the penthouse was designed, deliberately or not, to overwhelm. The red light that had been visible from the street was everywhere, dim and arterial, like the whole room was illuminated by something that had no interest in being comfortable to look at. The decor was the kind that takes real commitment to achieve. Furnishings made from materials that shouldn't be furnishings, artwork on the walls that belonged in a very specific category of nightmare, and the smell, the concentrated, undiluted smell of the entire building's wrongness, gathered in one place. Max was sitting at the center of it. He looked like someone who had spent centuries learning exactly how much menace a human-shaped body could project while remaining completely still. Dark hair, tailored suit, a plastic bib over his shirt, functional, not theatrical, to keep the blood off the fabric. He was feeding when they entered. A young woman on his lap, her wrist in his mouth, her face the specific blankness of someone who has gone somewhere else in their head because the alternative is worse. When he finished, he let her go. She slid to the corner, still alive, still conscious, eyes fixed on nothing. And then he looked at Tyler. He already knew who Tyler was. He said so immediately, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has been waiting a long time to deliver information that will hurt. He knew about the plan. He knew about Zara and Hannigan. He knew Tyler wasn't a hired killer. Nothing in the tower happened without Max knowing about it. That was the point. That was how the system worked. And then he said there was no reason for revenge, because the woman Tyler had come here for was already here. The door at the back of the room opened. Valerie walked out. She was exactly as Tyler remembered her, and completely different in ways that don't have straightforward descriptions. Same face, same hair, same eyes. But something behind those eyes was gone. The specific quality of a person who exists entirely within the limits of a human life was absent, replaced by something older, something that had stopped placing the same value on the things Tyler had spent 3 years grieving. She told him Max had given her freedom, strength, eternity. She told him he could have the same thing. She said it like it was a gift. Tyler didn't say anything. What happened next moved fast. Hannigan made his move, going for Tommy's shotgun, trying to give Zara the opening she needed. He didn't survive the attempt. Tommy shot him, and that was the end of the professor, who had been the most clear-eyed person in the building and the most honest about how this was probably going to go. Billy grabbed for the gun next. Tommy threw him off easily. Then Maria, who had barely registered as conscious for the entire night, came back into herself with the specific velocity that only operates when a child is in danger. She drove a kitchen knife into Tommy repeatedly. He fired once into the ceiling before he went down. In the chaos, Zara got Tyler's bag open and pulled out the stake. She charged Max with everything she had. He broke her neck without appearing to exert himself. She was dead before she hit the floor. Tyler raised the revolver. Max laughed at it, genuinely, contemptuously amused at the idea that a gun could do anything to him. The silver rounds hit him in the chest before he finished laughing. They didn't kill him, but they did something. The silver worked through him like acid through a system that had operated without disruption for centuries, and Max, for the first time, was on his back foot, screaming, weakened, exposed. Tyler picked up the stake from where Zara had dropped it. Max saw it coming. The fear on his face in that last moment was the first fully human expression he'd shown all night. The stake went through his chest. The centuries ended. What remained of Max burned down to ash on the carpet, and then there was nothing left to indicate he had ever existed at all. Tyler turned around with the stake still in his hand and looked at Valerie. She looked back at him. She had just stopped Max from killing Tyler herself, physically held back a vampire in his own territory to protect a man she hadn't seen in 3 years. Whatever she had become, something of what she had been was still operating inside it. She asked him to drop the stake. She asked him to let her give him what Max had given her. She said their love would last forever. He thought about Zara. He thought about Hannigan. He thought about Mildred in the corridor, and Billy growing up in a tower that had stolen every normal thing a childhood is supposed to contain, and Maria finding the only version of herself capable of violence when her son's life was at stake. He dropped the stake. He let Valerie bite him. Maria and Billy got out during the chaos. They took the dog that the brothers had left to fend for itself on the lower floors. Tyler was glad. He said so in his own accounting of the night. Glad they escaped. Glad the boy got out. He sounded like he meant it. Everyone else stayed. Mildred, the Joneses, the others from the floors Tyler and Zara had bypassed on the way up. They still come to the top floor every midnight. The routine continues. The only thing that changed is who sits at the center of it. Tyler and Valerie rule the tower now. He says he doesn't regret it. He says the guilt about Zara and Hannigan is real, but manageable. He says feeding becomes routine. He says love that lasts forever is worth the price. What he doesn't address, what he seems either unwilling or unable to examine, is what Valerie actually is now, what he's becoming. Whether the woman he went into that building to save still exists in any form that matters, or whether he fell in love with something wearing her face and convinced himself it was the same person. He came to slay a monster. He left as one. And here's the question that doesn't have a comfortable answer. If the person you love is taken from you and replaced by something that looks identical, something that remembers everything, says everything right, and chooses you over its own survival, at what point does it stop mattering that it isn't really them anymore? Is love still love when what you're loving has been hollowed out and refilled with darkness? Or is Tyler just the latest person to walk into a trap designed specifically to look like everything he ever wanted? The red light at the top of the tower is still on. It's always on. And the residents still go upstairs at midnight, every single night, without fail. Because some traps don't need walls to hold you in. Some traps are built out of something you'd never think to question, something you'd walk through a building full of blood and death to get back to. That's the part that should scare you the most.